Disclaimer: the information and education material contained herein is meant to promote the general understanding and dialogue of GAN's processing. Such information is not meant or intended to serve as a substitute for a healthcare professional's clinical training, experience, or judgment. For patients and individuals, such information is not to be a substitute for professional medical, therapeutic, or healthcare advice or counseling. For medical issues or concerns, including decisions about medications and other treatments, readers, viewers, listeners should always consult their physician or, in serious cases, seek immediate assistance from emergency personnel. Prescription information, procedures, and use of medical devices information should be undertaken only by properly trained and certified medical personnel. We specifically disclaim any warranties, express or implied, including implied warranties of merchantability or fitness for a particular purpose. Such information is provided, as is, and is believed to be accurate at the time of its publishing, but it is the viewer's job to evaluate the accuracy of any information found in this presentation. Every case presented is of their own experience, applied by themselves for themselves, and it applies to their case only. Every person experiencing health problems should seek professional medical advice and consult their course of treatment with a doctor. The processes of plasma balancing described herein are a natural process which supports the body but does not replace medical advice or therapies one is already subject to.
Welcome, Alex. Please proceed.
And thank you so much. Thank you, everybody, for being here on this beautiful Sunday afternoon. It would be really wonderful if it would be a beautiful Sunday afternoon right around the world. But nevertheless, it is an exciting time. And I want to thank you all for being here. We are the follow-up to the Knowledge Seekers workshops on Thursday and the powerful Brazilian team meetings on Friday. And the fact that we're represented here by so many from around the world makes this meeting a very, very important meeting. So this is the Keshe American Knowledge Team meeting. And so I thank you all for being here. And we are going to get into this particular process here. This is the Keshe Foundation Spaceship Institute Teachings on Plasma Science. We are in the Advanced Inertia series. The subject is preservation. My name is Alexander. I am from Canada. It is April the 27th, 2025. And this is part of the Keshe Foundation North America Plasma Education Series. As you can see, we have been running these series for a while. And so many of the advanced knowledge seekers have been supporting, because we all are continuing to learn. We're all in this big school together. And one of the things about advanced science is it's advanced. And so therefore, all of us are advancing along with it. So, you know, we all kind of have to go together and help each other out. So what we've been trying to do is condense the thousands of hours of teaching, not only of Mr. Keshe, but all the knowledge seekers around the world. And each of us in our own way is trying to bring together a method of describing things and conveying the knowledge so that others can understand. And it's a challenge. It's definitely a challenge because most of us are not scientists. We are trying to figure out the practical applications of this plasma science. So as we migrate along, our main concern is preservation, and that's the subject today. So please take from it whatever you can, and so that we can move on and help others. So preservation being the main topic, and when we talk about that, we talk about our culture. So, as I say, we're represented from everyone around the world. So what is our culture? So if I'm preserving my culture, is that your culture? And so all of us in turn could say that we're preserving our culture. Okay, well, so disregarding your culture. And of course, the preservation extends then to our academic standing, which is confounding to understand because how can you have an academic understanding when you're not understanding advanced science? Well, what about our stature? What is our stature? Is it the fact that maybe we're dragging our knuckles along the ground, or are we standing erect, or are we standing on the shoulders of midgets? And what about our wealth? What exactly is our wealth? And how does it relate to our country? Which country is our country? And what about our power? There's something you can grab onto. But one of the things that you really can grab onto is that warm blanket, our cozy, comfy zone. And, we have our own zone where we feel kind of safe, where we can justify and rationalize everything around us just to save face. Maybe we should put the blanket over our face. So we come to the point here where we are on the hesitancy highway. This is the lowest energy state, and the wagon trains are westward bound. So we don't want to let the tumbleweeds slow us down. The pioneers are the ones laying the tracks, but we have to shield ourselves from who is slinging arrows. So we want to migrate to the gold, don't we? Or do we migrate to the density of gold? Because you cannot lay the tracks if you cannot see the path. So maybe we have to circle the wagons, or maybe we have to circle the planet. And these are the questions that we're not asking, and we need to ask, because one of the things that we want to do is to advance our transportation systems so that we can enhance ourselves, enhance our vitality, and maybe pull into the gas station where we have some emotional enhancement or some physical enhancement. Did you want regular or super? And we need this because we're searching for outer space to seek the refugium, that safe, warm, cozy place of preservation on the plasma highway to our little pie in the sky. And it's a lot easier to make our little pie in the sky very cozy because it's little. But what about the rest of the sky? And what about the rest of the pie? And what about the rest of the universe? And what does it mean? Or that's just too much for us to contemplate because we're still having trouble with our own little our basic matter. And so in the books of Marin Kesh, the book number 1, The Universal Order of Creation of Matter, shows how the antimatter, dark matter, and matter state comes together. But, then we have book number 2, The Structure of the Light. And how does that light come together? Is it built on a scaffold? And then we have 2 matters. And then we have this connection between the 2 matters. So obviously we can go between those 2. But then book number 3, the origin of the universe, 1 disintegrates and creates 2. Our little tiny perfect world, which is our man's universe, and then our sister universe. But look closely at man's universe. Man's universe is around our little tiny pie. And that's even tinier than man's universe compared to the rest of the universe. So which is it? And so what we're trying to figure out for 375 weeks in a row, led by the Universal Council and Rick Kremen, how do we bring our planet together to think as one planet, and all of our nations to think as one nation, our race to think as one race, for justice and world peace. Who wants justice and world peace? What a novel concept. So we've been talking for the past 6 weeks about angular density, which is the falling. And in the process of falling, you increase your density. Obviously, you increase pressure. And this is what we understand as increased gravity. And so we find that the angular momentum, which we discussed, equals the moment of inertia times the angular velocity. And since this is the advanced inertia teaching, we have to remember it's really very basic. It's basic in terms of knowledge and explanation. So it's only advanced because we're asking these questions, because no one's ever said, why are there fallen angels? And what are the fallen angels? So is it the density momentum? What is density momentum? Well, it's the inertia density. We see it as falling. And in the process of falling, we see the acceleration. So acceleration means the adding to. But then there's also the diminishing from. And so if we're adding to the density and gravity seeks the density, then we're increasing the gravity. But the magnetical also seeks density. So we have these fields coming together and it creates this black hole. Is this a conflict point, or is it a binding zone? We need to ask these questions, because there is a basic rule, the plasma rule, where the higher strength feeds the weaker strength, as opposed to the man-made rule where the higher strength eats the weaker strength. And so it seems like either way, it's a conflict point. But that's just your point of view. It could be a binding zone. But then in order to create a conflict, there has to be a binding force bringing two armies together, isn't it? When you bring those two together, then you do create a conflict point. So the conflict point comes within the binding zone. And that's probably one of the reasons that we have so much conflict, because we are all individually within conflict, because we need energy binding. It fulfills the self-serving process. But we've disregarded the original intent. And so we do this at the expense of others. And we seem to like it because we see the pain that we cause others. And the others seem to like it because they, in turn, return that pain. And we have to understand this cooperation. I give you pain, you give me pain. And so it seems to be counterproductive, doesn't it? So that's what we want to talk about, because on this path, as we become more dense, we become more hard-hearted. We become devoid of emotion, devoid of empathy. And in turn, maybe we love to abuse. And as we mine things, we find out that miners aren't the only gold diggers. And so to promote this, we've been given these 10 commandments. And so these are our 10 commandments. They're not my dog's commandments or my cat's commandments. They're not my flower's commandments. They're my commandments. Someone gave them to me. And they said, thou shalt not lie. And so the implication, of course, is that whoever gave these commandments wants us to be like them. So therefore, if they want us to be truthful, and they want us to be like them, then they must be truthful. And I think that's where our first mistake comes in. So now we can see right through that. There's a big difference between man-made laws and universal laws, because we want to get on the transportation highway, and that highway is on a totally different elevation. And we've seen the difference. We've seen the difference between transmission, which involves frequency, pressure, and heat. We've seen the transition highway, which involves the relationship between carbon-14 and other isotopes. And then there are even more isotopes on the transmutation highway, and each one is gathering more and more field strength. And how do we do that? And then we realize that when we're talking about inertia, that means fields have to come together to create one. And there's a whole process. It's a cascading effect to come from the higher level to an intermediate level to a lower level. And so every time this comes together, we have to understand that whatever we have is a product. It's a product of the inertia. It's the coming together of two fields. So what we don't know is which fields does it come from, because all we see is the product. And for us, that's pretty good. You don't know how to build a car, but maybe you know how to drive a car. And that's really all you need to know in order to be successful at driving the car. But where are we going? We're on this highway, and where is it going? Where do we want to go? And who is in the driver's seat? So we find that maybe there's more to this picture than just meets the eye. So we only see what we see. And of course, we don't see what we can't see. But we have to recognize that it's there, because what we see is a product. But is it a product of just what we see? And is that all we take into account? What happens if it's a product of what we don't see? And if we don't see it, how do we take that into account? So we're just not answering too many questions, are we? But there seems to be a consistency where we seem to have a life that is chaotic. And we say, well, it's random. Well, that part is consistent. Well, what we're looking for is it practical? And so we either have to decide, is it scientific or is it religious? And so all of this comes together because it's a product, but we don't know what the factor is. Is it all about the self-preservation factor? Maybe that's what it is, because it involves a tensity relationship, right? So in the plasma science, it's the magnetical gravitational balance, which we call a MAGRAV. But in the scientific community, you're looking at the conservation of fields, the magnetic field versus the energy field. And then in the spiritual community, you're looking at the conservation of the spirit versus the motor of the soul. And then to move between the scientific and the spiritual, we see, well, one's in the awake state and one's in the dream state. And, we can't fully explain it. So we're just going to focus on our scientific responsibility and pay homage to the spiritual responsibility, maybe, on special days of the year. Well, the plasma science adds to the knowledge. And the thing is, this is done not daily, but all the time. So if this is ongoing all the time, then how do we accept this? How do we put this into our awake state and then our dream state? And how long is it going to take? What is the rate of change that is going to enable us to change this. So they call us the four-wheelers of a creation because it's a slow way to go. And we're just understanding that when we're looking at natural creation, it is balanced by natural decay. But decay is also balanced. And the decay is a form of creation. So it could be a natural creation based on the out-tensity, or is it a natural decay based on the intensity? But if it's decay, then the decay has its own intensity, but it's balanced off by its own out-tensity. Well, wait a second. So what we have is inertia field in the creation and inertia field in the decay, and the relationship between them is another inertia product. And so there is a bonding factor. And since we don't understand it, well, let's just fudge that. Because who are you going to ask? Well, what we have to understand is that there's a plasma inertia junction medium. Wherever it is, whatever that is a product. So it brings together the transition matter of the three dimensions of the X, Y, and Z axis. And then there's another track bringing together the transition matter of the X, Y, and Z axis. And that brings together a transfer state, which is a combination of these dimensions. And so that becomes the junction point, that junction point being a product. And then what happens? So we apply this in our basic understanding when we're learning about magravs and, how do we describe that? And so we had these coils. And what we didn't understand is that the energy that was traveling along these coils was going in two directions. And then when we look at it in a different perpendicular angle, we see that the field flows around the coil in two directions. And then there's an outer coil and an inner coil. And the outer coil and the inner coil flow in opposite directions. And so therefore, the field that goes around that coil goes around in different directions. And so all this is from our central point of view. So if we change our point of view, a lot of things are going to change. But the thing is, we haven't defined what causes the change, not only in the direction, in the force, in the flow, but in the point of view. There's no accounting for any of this. So we have to look at these junctions as being the NP junction, negative, positive. What does it mean? Well, the negative is the culmination product of the three dimensions of the X, Y, and Z axis, which is part of that transition matter. And then we have an equal and opposite transition matter to balance that off, isn't it? So it's the three dimensions of the X, Y, and Z axis of the positive side. So you bring the negative and the positive side. Now you have an NP junction. That becomes your transfer state. And so you have one where plus another one, and that equals 2. And that's your product. Well, that's great. Congratulations. And now what? So we see that if we take this NP junction and we apply a perpendicular momentum to it, then we start to see that mass in motion. And look at this. It creates a rotating field. But not one, it creates another one. And there are many more. They just stack right up. And so what is the relationship? Well, one is negative and one is positive. And in that process, it affects everything that's moving in that screen. And do we have to know the individual components? No, we just have to get in and drive. We don't need to know how it all works, but what we see is that as we devote more energy to it, it becomes a stronger containment of the rotating field, the vortex, if you will. It represents mass in motion, and we can continue that stacking. And so that increases the momentum because now you have a gradient momentum. So one is higher than the other, and one is lower than the other. Well, how low can you go? I guess it all depends on how high you can go, because to say the higher you go, the harder you fall. But, you know, how high is high and how big is large? Well, the thing is that we're working on a containment. So one of the things that we do need to contain is our anger, which is balanced off by our excitement, and we need to contain that as well. And so we set up this emotional control system, which is really a balance between the magnetical and gravitational field forces. This emotional control system is the NP junction, the product between the various dimensions that are affecting us. And by altering the emotional control, we can, or shall we say, regulate it, we can affect our point of view. Well, the emotional control is just reserved for women, isn't it? So that kind of excludes all the men, because men aren't supposed to have any emotional control. Or shall we say, men are supposed to have all the emotional control, and the women don't have the emotional control. And there we go, being self-serving in our own self-preservation. And that's what we have, is this field preservation. And so when we look at the aura layers, they are just combinations of auras, of our aura interactions and our inertia manifestation of these fields. So you wonder why we have these two hemispheres in our brain, because it composes the bicameral mind. So it's an amalgamation of the activity of the left hemisphere with the activity of the right hemisphere. And it creates this priority within us, a priority of self-preservation. And it's reflected in our aura, isn't it? But it's not including the rest of the picture. There's a whole lot that's going on here, and we're just not seeing it. So we have to understand that that's the problem. When we're talking about the conservation of energy, the Maggrav energy transfer state, which is the product, it's the product of the convergence between the mattergen and the susceptibility, where you have the balance on one side equal to the balance on the other side. But the balance on each side is created by the magnetical gravitational balance. And then you have the multiple layers of the atomic state, the nanostate, and the GAN state. And these are only the layers that we are seeing within our physicality. But we know there's more going on, because the emotional control state is not on this chart, which is affecting the susceptibility. And that's not on the chart either. So there's no accounting. And we just accept that. Well, who are you going to ask? So there obviously are Maggrav pathways. And so basically we have to understand that these are the force fields of attraction and repulsion. So the attraction becomes the gravitational force field of intensity. And from there, we can give feedback. But the repulsion forces are the magnetical forces of outensity. And that's part of the feeding. And so we say that there's a feeding, there's a feedback. So the feeding being part of the personality of the electron and the feedback being the personality of the neutron. And that all depends on your point of view, doesn't it? Are you feeding or are you doing the feedback? But there's a difference. And I'm sure you can clearly see the difference. So when we're talking about bringing two fields together, let's understand that the cups of life are not the cups of the pandemic. They were brought together to introduce the nanocoding process of monatomic science, where you bring two fields together to coincide with your core space and your inner space, and gives you emotional strength. Emotional strength, really. Just like a punch. Maybe sometimes you get a punch to the gut. Or do you get a punch to the face? And which is stronger, the emotional punch or the physical punch? But the thing is, it just shows us how life works. And so here we are, not scientists, but in the process of our own homes, we were able for a few dollars to put together components, physical components, and create nanocoding and create GANs, which we know that these are all different energy states. And we created different GANSes. Okay, so it wasn't just you put one together and just get the other one. You know, now all of a sudden we have carbon dioxide and calcium and zinc and copper, water and amino acid, and then, you know, we go become more sophisticated. We can even create gold. And so these are all coming from the cups of life. So what are we not seeing here? We're just seeing the product. We're just seeing the inertia field. So it's hard to see the emotion. It's even harder to see the soul. But the rules are the same. The magnetical gravitational relationship of the physicality and the emotion and the soul, and they come together and create the magnetical and gravitational relationship of the cup of the soul. The coming together of all three. And so the product becomes one. 1 plus 1 plus another 1 is more than 3. It's always been there. Same with the cup of the universe. We have a left side of the hemisphere and a right side of the hemisphere of the brain. And this is what we did in the cup of life. We brought the copper, which is physical, and the zinc, which is emotional, and the carbon, which is connected to the universe. 1 plus 1 plus 1 is more than 3, because we are more than what's our brain. We're only seeing half the picture here. And this is not a picture that we can see, not in our physicality, because when you open your eyes, you see your body, or you look in the mirror and you see your reflection. But the cup of the universe, you can't see that. But it definitely is a reflection of your emotional strength. That's where we get the feedback. Well, the Earth gets the same feedback. It has its own grand central station where it has all these different Earth ganses. And they are all different. They are all products. And they are come together the same way. One inertia field with another inertia field creating a product inertia field. And, you know, to identify that, we have the periodic table of consistency. That is to say, based on the conditions of the Earth space range details, we can identify an individual element. And that element can be found anywhere on the planet, as long as those conditions are the same. So wherever you are, there you are. And whatever you find, there it is. And whatever it is consistent as a product. But is it consistent from its creation? because we know that there are different purities. So there are differences. So we can assume that when we see the product, that it comes from inertia field. But clearly, those fields that it comes from may be similar, but they're not completely identical. So the Earth space range detail becomes a common denominator, an inertia product field. And we can identify that through its own signature. So in the beginning, there was the neutron, and it came before the atom, because the atom is derived from the neutron. You said that let there be light. Well, there's the light. Now you can see the atom. But in the process, when you add the mass of the electron and the proton and compare it to the mass of the neutron, hey, we're missing something. And it's the PM tick, which is the difference. So we don't mind coming from the darkness and say, let there be light. But where did this light come from? Because you only see the light because you can compare it to the darkness, but we have this PM tick, and where is it going? And why is it going? How do we account for that? So if we say that the PM tick is principal matter, which is magnetical, and in that process, as it travels as an energy pack, we put it in a nice little parcel. And that parcel, well, it could have a red ribbon, it could have a blue ribbon, it could have a yellow ribbon. It could be wrapped in brown paper, it could be wrapped in Christmas decorations. But when it comes together, it's a bringing together of the antimatter, dark matter, and the matter gen, and that point becomes a plasma gen conversion. It becomes an inertia field. And still at that point, it's in a plasma field, not in the physical field. In order for it to be in a physical field, it has to be somewhere. And that place is the Earth. So when that field is interacting with the Earth field, that creates a field interaction, which we call inertia. And that becomes the gravitational product, which we call a magrav, the balance between the magnetical gravitational field forces. So we see the full range, the PM tick coming from the universe, and the gravitational field, the physical manifestation of the product of inertia, of our physicality. So in between, there has to be a containment, and there has to be a relationship. So that relationship, whatever that is a product, is inertia. And in order to be that way, it can't be identical. It has to have a different field strength, because one has to be magnetical, one has to be gravitational. If that doesn't happen, then it doesn't exist. So either it gets diluted, dissolved, or it becomes transformed into something else. And so where's the accounting for that? I don't see that. Do you see that? Well, the thing is, we don't even see how that got there and what was the source. But in order to understand the magnetical, we understand that it is a product of forces coming down, and the gravitational, our product of forces coming down. So what we're seeing in the plasma picture is one convergence of magnetical forces and one convergence of gravitational forces, and the two together creating this plasma convergence. Still no accounting. However, at least we're kind of moving along. And so just like we have two hemispheres of the brain, the Earth has two hemispheres. And these are rotating hemispheres. So if we're standing on the North Pole and we look down, we see it's rotating counterclockwise. But our friends on the South Pole, when they look down from their pole, it's rotating counterclockwise. And then you see at the equator, well, these fields are rotating in opposite directions. But we know that the Earth is rotating in one direction. And thank God for that, because wherever you're standing on the Earth, you are hopefully standing with your feet firmly planted on terra firma. So when the principal matter comes as an energy pack and it's integrating into a field, are all energy packs the same? Maybe some are 1.5 volt batteries, some are 9 volt batteries, some are 12 volt batteries. Some are red and some are blue. Which is it? So whatever it is, the matter state is physical, where you can touch it and you can see it. And that's part of the feedback. Whereas the plasma state, you can't touch it or see it, and that's part of the feeding. And so you can't tell what is feeding you. That's why we are feedback dominant, because that's the only thing that we can tell. But there's more, isn't there? There has to be more, because whatever we're feeding back is a product of two other fields. So, we are not just feedback dominant, we are inertia feedback dominant. So we're missing a lot of the picture. And so this inertia feeding, where 1 + 1 = 1, but which one? Okay, how do you determine? They all look like one, but, is it the red one? Is it the blue one? Is it the white one? And coming together, it's more than 3. Why is it more than 3? Because they're still coming. You still have to have the 1 and the 1 and the 1 coming together when you have the 3. Well, then what happens to the 3? Well, it gets bigger, doesn't it? It gets more puffy. So it becomes more than 3. And how much more than 3? I don't know. How big is large? So when we're looking at a sphere, we see that there are 3 feeding dimensions, but those feeding dimensions also become feedback dimensions, because the product of those feeding dimensions also create another product dimension, and that's another feedback dimension. So we have 3 feeders and 4 feedback dimensions. And so we say, well, how big is large? And I don't know, but we have a formula that says this is the relationship of the size of the sphere. And it all has to do with our little pi. But pi is kind of, fudgy, you can't contain it. And then it's based on our point of view, isn't it? And we say, well, that is gold, is it? Or that is copper, is it? And that is maybe your opinion, and can you prove it? Well, yes, we can test it. But you see, it comes in different grades of purity. So part of it we can affirm. What about the other part? What about the other part that we exclude? How do we affirm that? So let's just fudge things, okay? So like it's gold. It looks like gold. Yes, it's gold. So it's the same with water, isn't it? Water is just water. Well, that means that we disregard whether it's clean or dirty. When we look at the water, we see that it's a combination of hydrogen and oxygen, and the thing that is confounding is that the hydrogen is a smaller energy and the oxygen is a bigger energy based on mass, and yet the water molecule is round, and it is a maggrav, which means it's a balance between the magnetical gravitational fields. But water has a unique characteristic. It is nature's solvent. And it comes together because we have gravitational conformation of hydrogen, which is a gas which we can't see, but we know it's there because we said, let there be light, and we see the light, it comes in colors, and that hydrogen has a fingerprint, which is basically the emission spectrum that is unique to hydrogen. And so that allows us to do the gravitational tracking. Of what? The magnetical creation, the magnetical source, the feeding source. And so we have the gravitational confirmation, but we also have the tracking to see where it comes from. Because there's a connection. So that connection rule applies to oxygen as well. So we just change it to oxygen. Now we have a different emission spectrum, but it's still part of all the same process where we say, okay, well, let there be light. So now we can see the light, even though the oxygen is clear and transparent to us as a gas. But, we have a gravitational confirmation, which means it comes from a magnetical source, and we can do gravitational tracking of that. So now we have a confirmation, but we have no accounting. How does one become the other? And so we realize that there's a nuclear feeding inertia that comes together. So everything that we're looking at is really a fragment of the complexity. So the one is created from the matter state, the other one is created from the dark matter, and the other one is created from the antimatter. And they all come from different paths and tracks and come together and form an NP junction where we have 1 + 1 + 1 is more than 3, because in order to maintain the 3, we still have to keep the 1 coming. And then that becomes our point of view. And so this is how we conserve this angular momentum. And we say the angular momentum equals the moment of inertia plus the angular velocity. So there's a relationship of angular momentum, which is inversely proportional to the angular velocity. So really, this moment of inertia is conserved, which explains why we have different purities. So this gradient momentum, if you think of it as a rotating field, which changes in magnitude and direction, if you think of a cartwheel or a ball tied to a string, and you see as it moves, it goes from the higher to the lower. And so that is your density gradient, the higher to the lower. But wherever you are is the inertia point. And so the movement is an inertia accommodation. But if you're at an inertia of 0, so there's no change in angular momentum, but there's a conservation of momentum, then that becomes a catalytic conversion. So you still have to maintain your maggrav condition, but you can transfer energy. And so you're neither created nor consumed. There's a magnetical consistency. And we see that in the atom. So we see a gravitational neutron, very consistent, and we see an equal balancing number of electrons, and they are consistent, and there's a balance. And in its purity, then we can say, well, that's that particular element, because we know the mass of that particular element. But that particular element could be in a physical state, or it could be in an isotope. And it will overlap other elements. So therefore, the gravitational field has actually overlapping fields, because an element can be carbon 12, carbon 14, or carbon 16. So it's still carbon, but it definitely has a different gravitational mass. And it definitely then has to be offset by a different magnetical force. So we still have to maintain that magnetic consistency, but clearly there's an overlap with other elements. So carbon 14 can overlap nitrogen 14, and carbon 16 can overlap oxygen 16. So we still maintain a consistency. So what we're talking about is the captured field. And so when we look at this captured field, we have to understand it comes in 3 layers. It's multiple layers. But we're not sure which layers these are. These could be, a bunch of other layers. And these layers could have multiple densities. And so since they have multiple densities, that means they have different colors. And then, of course, in order to balance off, then we have to have multiple spheres overlapping. And that's okay in a 2-dimensional process, but how do you have multiple spheres overlapping? Well, you have to have one sphere within another sphere. Well, if you have one sphere and another sphere, then there has to be a demarcation zone between the boundary of one sphere and the other sphere. But you have to have a demarcation from the magnetical side of one sphere and the gravitational side of the other sphere if the first one is inside the other one. Because if you had a demarcation of the inside in line with the demarcation of the outside, then those spheres would be of the same size. So you wouldn't have one inside the other. So this becomes a very important thing to understand when you're looking at things and the variety of things. So we like to think that maybe this is all about luck or a fluke, but you make your own luck by being at the right place at the right time. And so as we all go on our own path, we have to choose our exits. And since we want to be lucky, we better choose the right exit. Otherwise, we're just going to miss our exit. But even when we're there, that's not enough. We have to be aware where we are. So you can be at the right place at the right time, but you may not know that you're in luck now. So when we're looking at this plasma coming together, and we create this magnetical gravitational field, we understand that there's a blending where you have one field coming together and another field coming together, and the two blend together and they create this black hole, which is your inertia field. And you say, well, I have all these layers and these combinations, and they go in different directions, have different connections and interactions, but there's no accounting. There's no confirmation. But what there is a confirmation is that we have not just light, but we have humanity. But that humanity comes together from our gravitational tracking. The gravitational confirmation of that humanity is an inertial product. So we know about the field emanations coming from the aura, which we were saying the reinforcement coming from the left and the right hemisphere, which is the priority of self-preservation. But there's all this energy that is going out on the other side. So we have some going up and some going down, and it is not part of the self-preservation fields. These are emanations. And so some are emissions and some are absorptions. And we determine from our point of view which are the emanations and which are the absorptions. But if each field that is created by these emissions has to have a balance. So then the emission is balanced by the absorption, and the absorption is balanced by the emission. Well, that's why there's a gap. So what we see is the gravitational confirmation. What we don't see is the magnetical confirmation. And so the difference between these two confirmations creates this layer, this combination, and there's a direction. And the reason for it is because one field is stronger than the other, and it maintains this connection. We can't see the connection, but we can see the interaction. So in order to maintain our self-serving priority of self-preservation, we have to continue our activity of the bicameral mind to bring together the left and the right hemisphere. So that maintains our self-serving need, which we can see in the aura interactions or the inertia manifestation of our aura. But there are other connections which are beyond our aura. And they're obviously there, because if they weren't there, well, we wouldn't be there either. So this folding momentum, as it creates this rotating field, brings together the higher to the lower, and it gives us a direction. And we talked about folding into the density, which is a winding. But then it hits a threshold, and now that winding becomes an unfolding out of the density, right? That folding momentum continues. So what goes around comes around, isn't that what they say? And that's something that we all want. We all want around to it, because that's what we're always saying. We're going to get around to it. So maybe we have broken clocks, and we don't know if these are folding clocks or unfolding clocks. But then time also migrates, as we found. So even if the clock doesn't work, it's correct twice a day. So it isn't just the going around, it's how it migrates towards the density. And which density is it when we start to see that there's an overlapping gravitational field? Well, this is an overlapping gravitational gravitational field, and there's also an overlapping magnetical field. And the balanced force fields now are showing why there is a migration, because each field has to be balanced off. But they're all things come together to a certain point. So now we see that some points, like in Saturn, are in the body of the planet, but at some points are in the rings. But to demark the rings, we have to have shadows between the rings. But not just shadows, maybe we can have different shades. Either way, there are gaps. And so the gaps themselves have to be demarked. So often wonder, how do the magnetical lines of a magnet extend beyond the magnet? How are they maintained? And yet the magnet doesn't change in size. But the fields, the rings, change in size. There's no accounting for it, is there? So where's that energy going? And so we see that these aren't just cartwheels or tumbleweeds. These are plasma fields. And so they have different dimensions and different field strengths, and they come together, and you don't know which ones come together, but they all have this kind of circular momentum. And we know that because we see the field. We see the product. So when we talk about the density, we say, okay, well, gravity seeks density. But this density that we see operates within the Coulomb barrier, which operates within the Earth field. And so this maggrav is constantly in balance. And so we can say, well, we see these overlapping fields, we see these overlapping layers, but what we have to understand is that each of these layers isn't just an inner and smaller field within a larger field, but they are concentric. There's a gradient, there's a gradual coming together. But in order to have the one field coming together, there has to be another field that is coming out. So the one field coming in is gravitational. The other field coming out is magnetical. And to maintain the maggrav, it has to be constantly in balance. But we know that a maggrav can increase in energy or decrease in energy, because we know that because of our aura, because of the way we feel. Some days we have more energy, other days we don't. Some days we're inspired, and other days we are depressed. But whatever it is a balance. So the range is between the balance of the inspiration and the balance of the depression. And there are all sorts of ranges in between. And so we find that our internal terrain, which is a measurement of our internal pH, affects our mood. And we can see that in the aura. And so there's a forcefulness, which we have to understand the difference between what we call aggression. So aggression is balanced out by countering free will, right? My free will is more important than your free will. But there's another type of forcefulness, determination. And this determination is important because it supports free will. So your free will is part of my determination. So we get to choose. And whatever it is an inertial outcome. And the dominating strength of forcefulness comes from our emotion. So when we look at our humanity civilization in terms of our physicality, yeah, we're all here, but we have to identify ourselves, right? Are we Asian or are we Latino, right? And so we have this contention, and this contention is based and dependent on us reinforcing this segregation, this prejudice. This prejudice ends up being kind of a form of self-preservation, isn't it? Because otherwise, you diminish what you are. Well, you diminish and dilute. Yeah, I guess. But since you were diluted in the first place, that dilution diluted you into this contention of dependency. Because if you wanted to, you could change the purity. It's just a simple matter, and that's a very casual comment. It's a simple matter of creating the right field strength and the right emotion of intention. And can we do that without prejudice and still maintain our self-preservation? So there's a core dependency. And within that core, we have magnetical balance, which is a balance between the electron and the positron, and a gravitational balance, which is the balance between the neutron and the proton, which is kind of like a balance between me and my shadow. And you can see both in the mirror, can't you? So this is the problem for us. We are dependent on small spheres of density, little birds or baggage that we carry. And we've seen that with the transmutation training, the output. We see the Earth space consistency and the outer space consistency, but it's upside down because we cannot pass this Coulomb barrier of our adult little brain. Our physicality is dominating, and that's the colored line that's on top. And our soul, which is the blue line on the bottom, is hung up with this baggage and these birds that are clinging to it, not allowing it to escape from its containment, from its confinement. And yet, the vertical people interpret this relationship between the magnetical gravitational field forces and give you this beauty. But the thing that should be noted is not only is there a difference in the core, which we see the green part of the plant, but the flowers, which are the violet part of the plant. But the violet part of the plant also has a yellow at its core and a darker shade in between. And so there's a range. And not only that, but there's more than one petal. In fact, there are a bunch of petals. But what's interesting is that there are 3 sets of bunches of petals. So the manifestation of the vertical water hyacinth is a balance between the magnetical gravitational field forces that have created the roots, the stem, and the flowers, and then the variety of each in between. And isn't it ironic that it's doing this in sets of 3, like 3 dimensions? So these 3 dimensions are coming together and we see them. But it is more than 3 because look at all the flowers. There's so many flowers. So there's more than 3, but they keep coming together. So we don't see the cause of these inertial product fields. Well, we have to know that there is a balance between the magnetical gravitational field forces and that each of these products is within the range of the magnetical gravitational field forces of the environment, which is our Earth space. So just like we see this water hyacinth, our humanity is created the same way. So let's take our hands and just align them as we did before, and we see if we allocate one hand as the body and one hand as the soul, and see that it's a product of 3 dimensions. And we bring together the index of the body hand and the pinky of the soul hand. And we see that we have 3 dimensions in our physicality, which includes our emotion and our mental state. But there are other fields, and we talk about them as our chakras. So when we look at our soul interaction, it's exclusively in the soul, drops the body. It's just involved with the soul, the spiritual, and the astral plane. And so whatever we are in those 3 dimensions are working within the range between the soul and the body. And if we realign them and say one hand is the earth hand, the other hand is the man hand, and we say, okay, well, the earth has its own physicality, which is between the earth's crust and the earth's core, which includes the earth's mantle. And then, of course, we have the man hand, which is part of the emotional construct, the mental construct, and the soul. But that all is working within different ranges between the soul of the man and the earth's core. What is the practical application of this? And what's interesting is I was using a program, and it's not a cheap endorsement. It's a wonderful program that a lot of people use to make motion pictures. And they have a practical application of what we're talking about. And that is that they have color controls in that program, very sophisticated program. And the basic thing is the manipulation of color. Isn't that what we see when we see a motion picture, a video, any kind of video, whether it be on the internet or on our TVs or in the movie houses? It's a manipulation of the RGB, the red, green, and blue. And then when we manipulate it, we see a picture. But that picture is a product. And it's a product of what we see in this scope. which is bringing together the red product and the green product and the blue product. So the picture that we see is a product of the coming together of these three pictures. And that's a very practical demonstration of what we're talking about. But look, when we get into the high dynamic range, well, wow, that doesn't look anything like the picture. But that is the substrate that is supporting the picture that we're seeing. So we're looking at a product field of the red zone, the green zone, and the blue zone. And the picture then becomes a product of these three dimensions coming together. And we are none of these fields because we are in the audience looking at this picture. But what is interesting is that there is a control panel, and it exemplifies in practical terms what we've been talking about. There are color wheels, and there are 6 of them, and they get to choose 3. And so in this one here, we have the black, the dark, and the shadow. And what is instrumental is that the dark and the black are not the same, and neither is the shadow. And we can adjust these. So the adjustment is limited to one of those 3. Then we also have a global wheel on the right, which can adjust and proportionately adjust the other 3. So to repeat, each control can be adjusted individually, and then we have a global control. Now, that just takes care of the black, but we're going to drop one, and we're going to pick up one. So we dropped the black, and we picked up the light. Now we have the dark and the light. Well, which is it? Well, combination of the dark and light gives you a shadow. And so you can monitor those individually. Are you seeing a pattern here? Well, let's drop the dark. See what happens now. Oh, well, we have the light, which is demarked by the shadow and the highlight. So again, we choose 3. And again, we have the global control if we want it. Well, we dropped one, now we picked up another one. So we have the light and we have the specular, which consists of the range of the highlight being higher than just a regular light. So each of these is part of that dimension, and we see 6 wheels. Isn't that interesting? But the one wheel that doesn't change is the global wheel. That wheel controls it all. So not only will it control what you see in this frame with respect to these 3 dimensions, but this global wheel has an overriding control on all those other wheels that we've moved along. And the way we moved along was we dropped one, picked one up, drop one, pick one up, drop one, pick one up, and then we moved step by step by step. And we do the same thing in music, and we see that we go up to the low notes, which are very magnetical because they have low energy, and the high notes, which are gravitational because they have high energy. And so that's our range, and we can do a density step migration depending on the susceptibility. And we find that, well, the time also migrates in the same way, because if you change the frequency and you change the timing, you change the way you have the song, and the song goes from a very unstable and simple way to a very complex, and in turn then becomes a more stable way. And so that becomes the range, and you can go either way. And so this is the question we have. Well, how big is large? You know, what is the highest note? And so scientifically we say, well, there are weak nuclear forces and strong nuclear forces. But the weak nuclear forces are weak because they're far away. It involves our planets. But, you know, these far nuclear forces have to be very strong because these planets are very, very big. But we say the strong nuclear forces are near because we have this atomic structure. But these nuclear forces that are near are actually very weak because these atomic structures are tiny, much more tiny than the planets. You know, and we know this is true because we are walking on the planet. So we are not as big as the planet. But we have a core consistency. And we can see that manifestation in our physicality of the light. And then we can see the manifestation of the physicality of the planet, and it has a core consistency. And so our core consistency has to interact with the core consistency of the planet, and it comes together. And then, so just as we see in that program, the practical aspects of it, do we understand the magnetical relationship and the gravitational relationship of the outintensity and the intensity, and how it refers to the balance of plasma density, of which one is the black hole density, and the other one is the outer space density. So when we look at our physical manifestation, we look at the bottom three layers, and they seem to be very large, but they are actually very weak. And that's our physicality. And so as we elevate the process, drop one, pick one up. So we have our three dimensions. And as we elevate up, and we can see that in our auras as well, as we go from aggression towards determination, drop one, pick one up. But we can carry on, drop one, pick one up. And as we move through all the various densities, the one thing that remained consistent was our soul. That was the global control. Everything else changed, but you had 6 layers and you chose 3, and you could change each one individually, but the soul had control. So the soul was doing the preservation. And the soul overrides everything. So when we're looking at the aggressive chakras and we say, wow, you know, that's very physical, very warlike, just have to modify it and see we're not including the soul because the soul does not carry that characteristic. That is a feedback phenomena. And then if we look at the passive nature, the soul is not that way either. We have to modify that and understand that that's part of our physical nature. So we have a different nature. We are part of the humanity. And as such, we have to create an inertia shielding. And that is how we create our refuge, the refugium from hostiles, from aggression, from environmental harm. And we can reverse these characteristics because it's a two-way street. So when we're looking at, shall we say, the plasma fields, and they are a combination of the attraction and repulsion forces plus the magnetical, that's part of our natural creation of our intensity. And then we look at the balance of the repulsion attraction forces plus the gravitational. Well, that's part of our natural decay, but that's part of our intensity. So the balance between the repulsion and attraction forces is the maggrav. So plus the magnetical is our emission, and plus the gravitational is our absorption. And the balance of those two is the relationship between our intensity and our outtensity. And that is a reflection of our density. So that is a charge inertia. It's a balance between the magnetical and the gravitational field forces, where the magnetical forces are manifest into a plasma dimension of a counterclockwise rotation and a gravitational dimension of a clockwise rotation. And the two come together. And so we create this Earth space transmutation state that comes together, the bringing together of the three dimensions of the X, Y, and Z axis. But that becomes part of the outer space transmutation state, which follows the same rules. The X, Y, and Z axis, the choosing of those three dimensions. But when we are looking at the black hole transmutation, is it in the physical state? Is it a balance of the magnetical gravitational forces? Or is it between the physical and plasmatic field forces? Or is it between the magnetical gravitational field forces of the plasmatic state? And these all follow the same rules, but they are of a different energy state. So you drop one, pick one up, drop one, pick one up, you can change. And we do that the same thing with the inertia of the mind. So here we are with the soul of the earth and the soul of the man coming together, interacting with the soul of the physicality of the inertia manifestation of that soul of physicality. And then each one comes together and it creates one, the physicality of man and the physicality of earth. The three create one and one and one. This is the inertia of the mind. Which means that when we look the roadmap to this plasma highway and we see the relationship between carbon 12, carbon 13, and carbon 14, we see that the carbon 14 is feeding and it's feeding in. And we see the carbon 12, well, it's feeding out. That's called feedback. But we have a short circuit. And that's short circuit is working within the range. And it creates this density migration. It creates this shortcoming where we are short by about 20% of the energy that we need for our self-serving purposes, for our self-preservation. And it is this shortcoming, and we become dependent on that, which causes us to be aggressive. And doing that fulfillment of overcoming that shortcoming at the expense of others, which in turn creates a domino effect. So we have to disrupt that chain. In other words, we have to understand that there is another connection. And that connection doesn't change. It's always there. It is the global controller. You can change whatever you want to give your time and attention to, and it's going to be choosing three dimensions of that. But whatever is controlling has a purity. That's how the universe is created. It exists from energy. Energy is always there. It's always positive. It's always in motion. So the charge is reflecting the kind of motion and the direction. And if there is a direction, that means there's a coming to and a coming from. So not only in the universal order of creation of matters with the coming together of the antimatter, dark matter, and the matter state, but you take that and you combine it with another matter state, and you don't have an accounting of which one. So it could be on the same energy state, or it could be in another energy state, and it all follows by the conservation of energy. But the soul is the global connector. The soul is the one providing the food, and you need to tune in. You need to turn on to that power and drop out of the resistance so you can receive. And in order to control what you receive, well, you have to set the pattern. And once you have the pattern, then you get the energy. And that can be a terrible picture, or it can be a beautiful picture. So you get to do the substitution where you transfer the gravitational dominance at the point of substitution, where the intensity equals zero and the outintensity equals zero, and you do the adjustment. So you have the gravitational confirmation, whether that remains or whether that dissolves. And so that substitution point is within the black hole field, because now you have a two-way street, and you can go whichever direction that you want to go, and you can step through the various densities. And so what we see is our basic atomic state, where we step up into the monatomic, to the polyatomic, to the plasma field, but we only get to choose three. And so we have to step through these fields within the range, and the only range that we acknowledge is the range between the matter state of the plasma state and the Coulomb barrier of our limitation on this planet. Well, we have to understand that there are steps beyond. So, here we are in the beyond Sanya time, which last year at this time, with the conference in Sanya, we've seen the Earth space consistency. It doesn't matter where you are on this planet, there's gold in them, there are hills. So you don't have to go westward to be a gold digger. We can dig that anywhere. So, and we can adjust the purity based on the pH magrav condition, which affects the transmutation transition. But our planet is a blue planet. And so that is a balance between the intensity and outintensity. However, there's pollution, there's toxicity, and it isn't all physical. There's a mental toxicity. It depends on the peace within your heart, within your family, within your community, within your country. On this planet, there are many points of field strength of the peace dove. And so when we talk about being pioneers, is that a reflection or is that an illusion? The reflection being our exploration of new frontiers, and the illusion of being pioneers. We've been here before. This is repeating. And so now we are on the other side of the watershed and discovering that there's more that we have to account for, that we have to understand, that what we see is a product of what we've created. We have to understand the nature of how we create things. So the Keshe Foundation is drawing together all the research teams to advance the space plasma knowledge, because that's how we bring peace and prosperity. And the transmutation flights and their testing are in process. And this set of 3 is continuing and will be culminating in a significant achievement. Very soon. Next week or the week after, very soon. It's all part of the transmutation process. So this range transition transcends the inertia field transmutation dimensions, where the laws of conservation govern the covalent, trivalent, and tetravalent bonding attributes. So the containment of this inertia is manifest through the containment of equality. So the soul of the man cannot be abandoned nor compromised. That is the global controller. So the color of man is based on the integration with the soul of the man. That is the integrity of the man. And we have the control of that. We just have to raise our antennas to understand this message feeding and this feedback manifestation and the migration between the two, which allows us to do the tuning of the transmission transition, where you select one force, which is magnetical, and balanced off by the force selection of another force, which is gravitational. And so the resulting selections feed the MAGRAV manifestation. This selection manifestation is predetermined. So we have to enlarge our schemes of reference, encapsulate the schemes of density migrations. So your emission of intention consistently affects this standard folding deviation and leaves no room for war, provided we choose the peace dome of intention. So the transmutation manifests in balance with this peace dome. That is the environment, that is the anchorage. So the soul of the blood is anchored to the blood of the earth through the iron, creates this gravitational density. But we have frequency, we have pressure, and we have temperature, where we rate it, whether it's hot-blooded or warm-blooded or cold-blooded. Our anchorage is based on peace and harmony and the greater oneness. We just have to augment our reality to understand that there's a flux and a flow towards, to, into, within, through, out of, and from every charge, every form, all mass, matter, or substance, and intensify and extensify what we are. We are, and we need to be connected, and that connection supports the flux of continuous change. That connection is hooked on life. "587 weeks, we have brought the Knowledge Seekers workshops, seeking the greater oneness to transcend the limitations of nuclear science, and it appears like that's going to happen suddenly, even though it's been in process for thousands of years. But we have a problem. We understand that plasma reality is non-tangible because it's a representation of the source and this connection of our soul. And we have this tangible physical reality, which is a reflection of our emotion of presence. And so this plasma science anomaly needs to be resolved because we have a material enhancer, which is gravitational, and we have a body enhancer, which is magnetical. How do we resolve this? There has to be a technology release because it's hard to sleep when our beds are burning. We have to implement a scientific rescue, a financial rescue, a political rescue, a preservation rescue. With the universal order of matter, we bring together through the inertia fields our physicality. The bringing together of this comes from somewhere. What we see is the coming together of the light. So there's a light side and there's a dark side. But the dark side, as we've seen in the controls, is not the same as the black side, the black hole. The dark side and the light side are on the same side. On the other side of the black side is another light side. And so we see the origin of the universe with the similarity of the atom, creation of the electron and the proton combination, and the PM tick. And so we had a confusion. Should book number 1 be book number 3 or book number 3 be book number 1? And it seems to always rotate around the structure of the light. What we have to understand is then when we're slinging arrows, we have to understand which side is the pointy side, because that's the direction that it goes. And it always goes in that direction, because 1 + 1 + 1 is more than 3, and we have that. And we are the observers of that. And then we observe that there's something that we can't see. But what we can't see creates another 3 dimensions, which is the origin of the universe. And so what we can see and what we can't see is our point of view, which means whether it's a form of creation or whether it's a form of plasmatic reality, we are none of those dimensions. We are the observers, and we are the participants. We are in our own fudgy dimension, and we need to understand that so that we can be travelers across this universe. This is the coming together of the inertia fields of the plasma science. This is the Keshe Foundation Spaceship Institute Teachings of Plasma Science, so we're welcoming all the beautiful knowledge seekers learning about the new selection process of the new plasma science. There's a World Peace Treaty. You get to choose it, and you get to sign it. And you can sign it with a pen. You can sign it with your soul. You can sign it with your emotion, but sign it with true intention. Thou shalt not lie. So is the moment of inertia a paradigm starter or a stopper? Is the peace dome of outer space an umbrella or a fountain? Is the inertia of the present governed by dimensions of history? How do we impart the importance of self or self-preservation in a universal context? It is time to set new targets for the inertia of self-importance. Here we are rationalizing the inertial cosmic balancing of the new physical transmission dimensions. Plasma science is delivered daily via the Peace Dome in a practical exchange for peace on Earth. And so welcome to the new outer space age. That's the end of this class, and it's also the end of the Advanced Inertia series. Thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed the trip.
Okay, thank you very much, Alex. Gosh, there's a lot to understand, as you've repeated continually during this presentation and other presentations as well. I know you mentioned the commandments and things, and we haven't really done a great job with that. That's why, as we played that announcement part, I think there's going to be a black hole or a sink created that it removes this dimension of killing or this field of killing within our structure. So again, this is a gift in a way from the universe to help us along. I think if we had to do it on our own, we haven't done well, but the daughter of Mitra will master this right away. Not to be envious, but I think the way they'll reach humanity is in a different way through some of these systems. Would anyone like to ask a question of what Alex just shared with us? Let's open it up to the participants. I know Karsten was here. I was going to ask him how he's, if he started to play with his cosmic ray Twinity Magrev, but he's not with us now. So let's open it up to the participants. As Alex said, we've had the Industrial Revolution, the Computer Revolution, and now this is the Plasma Revolution. And again, we're just early pioneers in understanding all this, but I think there's systems and other ways that will affect us and affect us all on this planet, touching our fields of our soul, let's say, especially the killing part. Apparently, this is very integral in us moving into a new dimension. Again, anyone want to ask a question or make a comment or take exception to what Alex has said? That you may have a different understanding, and that's fine as well. In a previous workshop, he talked about the future of robots, and he said if you knew the future of the robotics the way I do, apparently everything is going to be getting handed over in a way to the robots. And then he's saying in this workshop, do we need robots? Does that mean everyone will be serving one another? Because this will be the elevation of the soul to serve, and do we need the robots? I think they're coming. They're definitely, the industry is looking forward to them to replace a lot of, especially mundane, sort of simple work. Anyone want to comment on that at all? He did talk about creating, I know you talked about the vortex, Alex, and he said that they would create the vortex within this system. I think if we look at the transcript, we could see that. But again, I don't understand everything that's being conveyed. Very little of it, actually.
Wow, tough questions. The thing is that you just don't build a house by laying bricks. So the action may appear to be the same, but the functionality is different. And so your goal, your intention, your overview, it all comes together. So if you don't have that overview and you start laying bricks, there's no guarantee you're going to be building a house. So, you have to have a plan. And where does that plan come from? So it is something that you create. And where does that inspiration come from? So in order to understand that, you have to have the faith in that inspiration to know that it will be there because that's what you want. So your inspiration has to be in synchronized with what you want. You have to be truthful. And that's the problem with lying. You think you deceive somebody, But the one that's most important is yourself. If you deceive yourself, wow, then you can't believe anything. Because how do you expect other people to believe you if you don't believe yourself? And so, we have this audacious attitude where, we can't lie to ourselves, but we can lie to others, and it seems to be okay. Well, the act of lying would be the same. So if you're lying to others, you're lying to yourself as well and saying, oh, I told them a lie, so, I just assume that they believe it. But this is where you run into a problem when someone can see directly into your soul, and your soul never lies. So it's your physicality that lies. So you think you're fooling them, where you're really only fooling yourself. And this is where the problem comes in. And we've been doing that for so long because, as they say, we get too soon old and too late smart. So it's the rate of change that is a factor. And we're affecting that factor. And we can see that because the events around the world are also accelerating. And you have to ask why. Because why is a product of factors in the background. So we have to recognize that those things in the background exist. And I frankly, when I was younger, I just, ignored that, shrugged my shoulders and said, oh, I really don't understand why you're thinking that way. But it all boils down to self-preservation, doesn't it? So, you want to preserve your power, that's great, but you're fooling yourself. And if you're willing to fool yourself, well, that's also great. But we have to depend on truth because that is dependable. You can't depend on undependables. So truth is the only thing you can depend on. And the thing that is most truthful is your soul. And so that is something that you can depend on. Back to you, Mark.
Yeah, and the soul is the one we steal from the most, our closest friend. So I think we have a lot of work to do to get there, but that's why I believe we need some external help in a way. We haven't gotten out of it even with the commandments. I said they haven't worked very well. The stealing, the lying, the killing.
Mark, I think people have to realize one thing about robots. Who designed them? Human beings. Who built the architecture of the brain? A human brain. So what's superior, the human brain or the robotic brain? We take a look at all these advancements in machines that before we used to do it by hand, and now someone takes the hours and hours of programming to take a piece of metal, a raw billet piece of metal, and turn it into a piece of art. And that takes higher consciousness to have the patience to sit and program the thing. I remember quite a few years ago, I worked with a scientist who was working with a scanning electron microscope to identify metals. I said, oh, well, let's just put this thing in and turn it on. He says, no. He said, I have to write the program to tell this machine exactly what to look for and into what ratios of different combinations of metals. It may take me 1 to 2 years to write this program, and then we can fire it up and test it. So I think Mr. Kesh may be seeing a long ways into the future when he sees the robots that he's talking about, or may not. Who knows? It depends, I think, on the advancement of the soul of the human race.
Yes, and he said we're going to decide collectively which way to go. So that must mean we're going to get some sort of bigger unification than we have now. We all know we're humans and we're on planet Earth, but there's going to be a bigger work of collaboration and cooperation, I think, between all, and coordination among the nations and humanity as a whole. Maybe we'll come to find out we're not so much different than the others. As he said, the soul is pretty much the same around the planet, but the magnetical gravitational fields has caused us different behaviors and different liking to certain different things, depending where you are, but essentially the souls are the same. Maybe this is part of the realization to work as one unit, as collective humanity. And again, we're just early into this game, I think, but it may be sped up by quite a bit. As he said, he's moving the goalposts by centuries.
Please take into consideration, he did mention that he's been carrying this technology around for over 20 years so far. So, you know, it isn't just him releasing the technology, it's us wanting that technology to be released and being ready to understand it, because, you know, as participants on this platform and all the others, it's our responsibility to learn and convey that knowledge to others, because right now, the majority of people on this planet, they're at the right place at the right time, but they're not aware. And they need to be made aware. And I can tell you from personal experience, it can be shocking. So can we, you know, kind of ease them out of their little comfy zone? Yeah.
Yeah, I think a lot of factors are involved here. The sun, we know, is playing a very, very large role. He said we've been hit by an energy meteor. So most of us haven't considered, yeah, we see some strange weather or different temperatures being created, but I think there's more going on. So there's a lot of things that are involved in this whole process coming together just the right way. Remember when they said, why did you made a mistake, Mr. Kesh? You didn't release the knowledge 15 years ago or whatever when you were in Iran? He said it wasn't the right time for it. So where we're getting to, or where we're apparently it is the right time for this to come out in a very powerful way. Humble but powerful. And as he said, science, the man of science on this planet has to understand it. Otherwise, this will get shelved for another century or two, and the abuse continues. Mr. Kesh will be gone, he said.
Well, that's a key point. So, you know, you can delay and you know, it's fine to kick the can down the road, but how far down the road do you kick it? At which point in time you come to it and you say, well, that delay was out of range. So I think what has happened now is we've come into a very critical time where humanity has realized that we're in that range, and if we kick the can down farther the road, we're going to fall out of it. So it's our awareness to know that on our journey, we have come to an exit ramp. And now we have to do something about it. So being at the right place at the right time, being aware, and then doing something about it. And right now, our challenge is how to deliver this technology in a practical way for this planet to become peaceful and prosperous.
Well, wouldn't you think as materials are being created, these mining companies that are involved in that process now would sort of abandon the mining and say, let's move in this direction. We don't need any people and we don't need to dig any holes. And then, of course, if he starts to show, I'm sure they're going to, I'm thinking copper will be one of the materials created. He showed us a material in the workshop that they don't even know what it is, but I was thinking copper would be. And then, of course, they'll verify it. Some people will take samples and say, yes, this is definitely copper, although it doesn't have a signature from this planet. And then they'll probably ask about, we make gold? And I don't know what'll happen to the entire financial system once the few initial specks of gold and they're verified is going to do. It's going to send a shockwave. And I know Mr. Kesh said we could do that.
Well, Mark, when you look at a corporate mandate, one of the things that's missing is really an intelligent corporate mandate, because everybody says, oh, if we go into business, we want to be the best, we want to be the most successful, we want to make the most money.
Yes, the most profitable.
Yeah, be the most profitable, sure. Okay, but what does that mean to be the most profitable? But if you incorporate within your mandate, one of the things that we did many years ago, and unfortunately, we weren't able to overcome it, and the Kesh Foundation is overcoming it very, very well. And that is to say, if you find something that allows you to do something better, then you have to abandon what you're doing. And so, we have a problem right now, and it's very exciting. I think it's very exciting, and that is the new transportation technology. I think is wonderful, but
This is what he said. Trump would create the conditions for the technology, even though he wasn't aware he was creating the conditions. And this 8,000 something planes seems to be an opening for the Kesh Foundation. I think he said we want to go that way, where nobody has to buy from Boeing. They're going to teach the nations. And I would think this would be in the Matter State, but I'm not sure.
well, I did receive a confirmation from one gentleman, and we broached this subject directly. And so the question was, can the plasma science enhance their business? And so the answer was yes. But I posed a question, and your business suddenly ceases to exist. Would anybody care? Except you. And honestly, he had to admit that no, nobody would care. Like it really wouldn't make a difference. And so, if you go on the internet and you see, a lot of businesses, oh, I can make these cute purses. Well, kudos to them. They're doing an industry and they are creating something, and they need to make money, and they're being resourceful. Okay. But if suddenly they didn't need that product, would you say, well, we're going to continue making purses and we're just going to stock them up in the warehouse, and then, maybe sometime down the road, someone is going to need purses, and we say, hello, you don't need that product anymore, and it was like, I was talking to Randy there. We perfected the, the crank handle for starting the Model T Fords. We have perfected the very best crank handle. And, I think we could sell millions of them. Anyway, I want to thank everybody for allowing me to continue to present. I think we all feel that there's a special atmosphere that is circulating around this planet. And I'm talking about this uh, vitality enhancement of this plasma energy that is going around this planet. People can feel it, but they can't see it. They can't understand it. They can't touch it. They don't understand what it means to them in practical terms. And so it's, it's not that it's not there, because Mark, you and your team, and the Canadian team here, we understand that it's not working very effectively over here, but when we look at the Brazilian team and the Spanish team and what's going on, it's amazing. So we can't say that, we're not having an effect. It's very, very impactful. And, we could just imagine what's going on with the Iranian team and with the Chinese team. And so it all depends on how you view things. And if you just say, well, in my little tiny perfect world, if I want to have a cup of life meeting and how to make a cup of life, nobody's going to show up for the meeting. But clearly you can see in Brazil 30 people show up to a meeting. That's a difference in the culture. Okay, but that's not the Brazilian culture. That is the culture that it's a planetary culture. They're tuned into it. We're not tuned into it. So that means we can change, doesn't it? And that's what we have to do. And then we also have to change the rate of change because we've really got to catch up. We are so far behind all these other communities. And yet we were supposed to be, a first world nation. Well, I have concerns about that. And I think, the timing is here now for the sake of this continent. We have to wake up to the reality, as I say, smell the coffee and get moving. Because how many people did Boeing have to lay off?
17, 20,000, and then there's a multiplication factor of the support people. So you're talking a couple 100,000 people impacted by this one move.
Okay, but that's not our fault. That's Boeing's fault. Okay, because if they continue to insist on manufacturing crank handles for Model T Fords, sorry, okay, you have a mandate and, you're living by your mandate. So what we need to do is to understand that this science is there to increase prosperity. It's a responsibility that all of us have to bring employment, massive employment, okay? Because rent has to be paid. Food has to be provided. And you can't say, well, we'll get around to it next month. It's like people tell me, oh, well, I know, I've got cancer, but, I have to go on holidays and I'll talk about it when I come back from holidays. What? You think cancer takes a holiday? You think, the conditions on this planet take a holiday? I know some politicians take a holiday. We have that problem in Canada here. And we're going to see the consequences of that. But I can't see, businesses can't take a holiday. They have employees who depend on it, and there's an economy that depends on that. And that contributes to a certain kind of peacefulness and harmony. So.
And imagine if you knew what Musk knows or his team knows. He's got to make a decision on the car company, and he also has to make a decision on the rocket company.
Well, he's not. He's not making
Not
that.
yet. Not yet. This demonstration in the public, if it gets out and it's far-reaching, is going to create, again, scientists having a major debate where certain one says this is not following the rules of science, but the other one said, yes, but I analyzed it in my lab and it's actually what it's purported to be, whether it's gold or copper or aluminum or whatever. So this is going to create a lot of consternation and hopefully a beautiful debate of certain ones relenting and other ones going forward with the technology. This is the point.
The train's left the station and, woulda, shoulda, coulda,
But we don't want to leave anyone behind. This is the whole idea. No one gets
Yeah, but you don't
abused.
stop the train. That you know, you don't, you can't say, well, you know, I have to stop the world from turning because, you know, you know, my makeup's not right, or I'm not wearing the right
No,
perfume.
the world will continue to turn.
Well, that's it. So, you know, don't blame the earth for turning. Okay. So, fortunately for, you know, most of us, as the world turns, there'll be a tomorrow. But, you know, we have to understand that tomorrow is not going to be the same as today. Tomorrow's another day. So, you know, we can say, oh, yeah, well, I can do it tomorrow. Well, the difference between today and tomorrow is what's called a promise, you know, and that's a promise to nobody. So we have to promise ourselves, we have to be truthful to ourselves, and the opportunity is here and now. But this problem is greater than each and every one of us individually. And now we've come to that awareness point where we see that each and every one of us, and I mean each and every one of us, is suffering to some extent, differently for different people, but we're all suffering from some extent. And a lot has to do with the fact, you know, I'm going to tell you, for instance, I quit smoking, but I enjoyed smoking. So I had to make a decision. So that's one of the things that we have a problem with here. I think this planet is a wonderful planet. This is heaven. But that doesn't mean that things can't change. And that doesn't mean that things can get better. And if we don't do it, then it's not going to get better, because been there, done that. We've seen the history. So how do you change the future? You have to change the history.
And you have to elevate the soul of the man. As he said, even if we give you the advanced technology where you could feed yourself, you can create materials, you can go from New York to Beijing in 5 minutes. Without the elevation of the soul of the man, within one generation or two, you'll be right back again, killing and destroying. So this is why this elevation of the soul to serve becomes the key. And this is what's going to happen in these systems where he said he'd create that sink, that black hole, to pull this energy or those fields of killing out of our structure.
Yeah, but you know, we are an active component of that. And so we are gathering up a momentum, and we have achieved a critical mass. And you know that's true because even when you look at the American Revolution, only 3% of the people were required to initiate the revolution, and we are more than 3%. So we are overdue. And that's, you know, we're just going to have to go. And as they say, you know, as much trepidation as we have, just look at how wonderful it's going to be on the other side. And we just have to go through it and have the courage and to understand that the soul is in charge. Thank God the soul is in charge. And thank God for all of you for attending to this platform and making it as powerful as it is. And I thank you all for allowing me to continue. I will be continuing next week because there is so much more, and we know that we are going to continue learning. So thank you all. Back to you, Mark.
Yes, and of course, there's a cosmic ray paper coming out very soon that'll explain more, or maybe give us a bigger headache till we finally understand it. And then as the foundation grows in structure, I think Mr. Kesh will be doing some public experiments on Thursdays, unannounced. He had mentioned that about not eating or experiencing that energy being provided to you without you even being aware of it. So there's many, many exciting things coming into play. I'm looking forward tremendously to it, that everyone has what they need Maybe not more than they need, but they have everything they need. So this is I mean, we have 2 billion people that are, again, living on the edge without electricity, without the clean water, without the education and the rest of this. Maybe without the education is a good thing, but we'll replace that with some newer systems. And I think enlightenment will somehow just happen rather naturally because we'll be in the fields of it. From the sun and the systems and what's put on the satellites and the rest. This is all coming together. I don't think he can explain everything he could explain, but there's a lot of things in the background that are being put into place. And hopefully the medias will attend, and I know it'll be broadcast across the Keshe Foundation platforms, and this should start a very large debate. Of course, some will say it's magic, others may say it's the devil, or as they did with Tesla, cavorting with the devil to achieve this sort of what appears to be magic, but we know it's science. So this should start quite a lot of upheaval in a way of our understanding, and that people that thought and worked on this dimension will, in a way, have more than a confirmation of it as we see these systems actually coming out. So I'm looking forward to it myself, and I'm sure we all are. That's why we're here. Anyone else want to make a comment? Ask Alex to review something. He's more than willing. Of course, the main idea, as Mr. Keshe said, is to keep the Keshe Foundation free for humanity. This is the video we'll close with in the final disclaimer. But it's up to you to participate in these systems, and this is how we're keeping the foundation free, that it can be developed. They don't take money from anyone, but yet they do need massive financing to get to the next step. Some of these systems, I know the one in London that we saw, I think he indicated it was $3 million to produce that system, because they have to use a lot of vendors and a lot of precision things and the rest of this. So I don't think they do that internally to the foundation, but they just give someone a piece of work to do and they complete it. They may not know what it's for at all, but they complete it to the specifications. So these systems are not inexpensive to produce. And that's what I was wondering, if we can all do it, why is he wanting to bring more data in to perfect systems to mass produce, it would seem to me, if we can do it ourselves? Anyone?
Okay, you can do it.
We already are doing it.
Yeah, but what about the other 8 billion people? Okay, so if you don't want to leave everybody behind, everybody is in a different learning curve.
Agree.
Okay, so that's one thing. Also, to understand that if this is not the first time that this has happened, it's maybe it's the first time that it's been explained the way it's been explained. I personally, I spent most of my life, I didn't understand this at all. It all, seemed to be like out there and okay, well, it's fun to talk about. Let's go to the coffee shop and, waste away our afternoon and we'll talk about this without understanding what is the practical implication. And now we're coming to grips with the fact that there is going to be a practical impact. Okay, so how do we deal with that? Let's, a simple thing as, let's say watching US football. So what happens if the fullback gets the ball and scores a touchdown every time? And the score will be,
boring.
287 to 281. Yeah, boring. Yeah. Well, so things are going to change, and what are you going to do for, entertainment? One of the reasons I stopped watching a lot of movies is because I found that it wasn't entertaining because the horror of life is not fun. So I don't need to go to the movie theater to, show that. When you look at movie theaters going back, they say, around the time when the talkies came out, uh, they had stills and then they had motion pictures and then they added voice. And then they started to incorporate little things that were shocking, and people were fainting. If someone, let's say, fell off a horse and hit their head, the shock and the trauma caused people to faint. Now you go on the internet and you see someone, whacking someone over the head and being so destructive, and we're blasé about it, because we become conditioned to accepting it. Well, it's not acceptable. We have arrived at a condition that it's not acceptable, but we have abdicated that decision. So we have to now assume control over that decision and say, no, I don't accept that. I'm not going to watch that. I'm not going to tolerate that. And you want to tolerate it, that's fine. That's your business. My business is I'm not going to tolerate it. And so no amount of influence on your part is going to make me want to do it. And the KAKT Foundation is the same way. We have the technology to enforce peace. Okay, that's what this world needs, is another bully? You got to be kidding. We have enough bullies. What we need is a roadmap to peace. And that's what we're providing. So thank you all. Beautiful Sunday afternoon. Thanks for being here.
I think we'll be asking a lot of questions if this starts to get or spread across the internet. People and you're just interacting, you have a conversation, and then somebody will say like, "Hey, have you heard about this guy making materials or something like that? I heard there's something going on. They could perhaps even make," and this will give you an entree into explaining. You've been in and around the KAKT Foundation for a bit, and you understand a little bit, and you can openly share what you think you understand about it. So I think the chatter will be created first in the scientific community, and then it'll come down to the man on the street like me, and we'll be able to discuss it more openly. And then if one of the major scientific people say, we have to confirm this, we may not understand it, but it's certainly, there is confirmation that this is real, this will open up a whole dialogue across the spectrum of the educational community, the scientific community, so many different communities. And hopefully we'll get to the point where we can start teaching young people when they're in kindergarten or first grade the operation of the soul and the rest of this. But he said he's going to hide the technology. If he didn't get a channel on the satellites, he can embed it within the movies. He can embed it within the radio stations without the radio station even understanding it, where perhaps you'll be fed, or perhaps your soul, the energies of your soul will be touched in such a way that you kind of seek out the plasma knowledge. So we have a lot of beautiful and, again, far out ways of delivering this technology with man knowing or without man knowing. So thank you all for being here. I'd like to play the video, Keep KAKT Foundation Free for Humanity, then the final disclaimer. Thank you all from Europe who've joined us and stayed late, and the rest of this. So let's see if we can just bring up this video. Thank you, Alex, again, the amazing Alex, for delivering for us. So let me bring this video up, and I'll, and of course you voiced over part of this. and we'll see some of the development. I don't know how long ago did you make that voiceover on this video, Alex? It's been at least a couple years.
Isn't that something? Yes.
I'm not sure exactly when it was produced, but again, he talked about the dialysis. He talked about the stones in the kidney, melting them, growing teeth, and so on and so forth. So this is the sort of thing that's just going to get humanity enamored with this technology, the far-reaching effect it has, not only on the physicality. I think people will start with the physicality and then come to realize later it's all about the elevation of the soul of the man, or the soul of this planet, let's say humanity and overall.